Have you come out of an encounter with a narcissist and feel like you're still reeling? Or maybe you've come out of a relationship with a narcissist and it feels like the jobs that you know you can do and the tasks that you have to get done are the only things that are keeping you together. To the outside world, it looks like you're coping, that you're managing. But on the inside, you're screaming, you're angry, you hurt, and you're lonely because the people you know that you thought might be able to support you just don't get it. And as an empath, there's this extra layer, actually 2 layers, because as an empath, you already know that you absorb what other people feel and are far more sensitive to the energies around you than the average person. But more than that, you have a pretty good idea that energy is everything, and everything starts with the energy. And there's that creeping, cold fear that says, what if I can't stop this happening again? If any of that resonates with you, then you're in the right place. So stick with me, and I'll take you through the 3 key areas that you need to cover if you want to heal. And I want to emphasize that I'm only using the word heal because when everything hurts and you feel jangled and you're struggling to move forward, it feels like healing is what you need. But the reality is that you're not broken, you're not ill, and you're not damaged. And what's happened is that at some point in the past, your circumstances didn't protect you. And you've adapted to those circumstances, and that's what's playing out in your life now. We're going to go into more details as we go along, but I want to start with you as the empath, because you already know that the energy is everything, and that's the place we have to start. So there's 2 key areas here. The first one is kind of how the emotional stuff plays out energetically and how that interacts with other people. So let me show you what I mean. Now imagine you are classic empath here, and you have an aura. Well, we all know that auras exist these days. They're measurable, specific. We can measure the electromagnetic vibrations that come off anybody, and we can measure the things that increase and decrease them, things like heart rate variability and heart coherence. That's the word I want, heart coherence. So let's say, for argument's sake, that everybody has a circular or egg-shaped aura. I know if you're a human design projector, you have a projection at the front, and there are all sorts of other variations. But for argument's sake, let's say it's circular. Now, if as a result of your past experiences, possibly as a child, possibly in your early years growing up, there are areas of your life that made you feel less than, that you weren't good enough, you weren't quick enough, you weren't old enough, you weren't big enough, you weren't whatever, that in some way you were insufficient, that you weren't allowed to speak up for yourself, that it was dangerous to speak up for yourself, it was dangerous to take up space. It was going to cause problems if you showed everything that you were. All those kind of influences end up giving us something that looks like this. And that is the representation of how our emotional field lies within the aura. Now, all these areas where we haven't filled out are the areas that anybody and anything other than you can fill. So when you come across your average narcissist as an empath, they're honing in on these spaces, and that's exactly where they go to. These are the areas where they can manipulate you, where they can make you feel even more less than, where they can control your behavior. Let's just take a moment and see how that relates to the other empath aspect that I want to talk about. So that's a diagrammatic representation. But if we look back at something that Seth said, you may remember the teachings of Seth channeled through Jane Roberts. He gave a very succinct summary of what happens when you get a victim and perpetrator together. And for the sake of argument, let's call the empath the victim in this instance. And that gappy aura looks like that. Meets a narcissist or a perpetrator. The thing about the narcissist or the perpetrator, they may well have gaps around, but they're so full of their own entitlement, their conviction that they can do what they want, that they actually fill this space And they, to all intents and purposes, if you're walking around with a negative ion, they're filled with a positive ion. And what you get, according to Seth, is a magnetic attraction between the two. It's not personal, but it's highly targeted. So your average perpetrator only has to walk into the field of somebody who's carrying any kind of victim consciousness, and they're magnetically attracted to it, and vice versa. Now, we're going to take that a step further and look at how the law of attraction plays into this. So if you look at the classic law of attraction, and many people talk about it these days as the mirror principle, the suggestion is that you get what you are. Yes, that's more or less true, but it's not a direct reflection. So I've literally had other women say to me, I had this narcissistic relationship. Does that mean I'm a narcissist because that's what's reflecting back to me? And the answer is no. The very fact that you can ask the question means that you're not a narcissist, because your average narcissist is never going to ask that question. They're far too busy maintaining control. They wouldn't jeopardize that for anything, so never ask the question. What the whole reality machine will do is show you what you are. So if there is a part of you that feels less than, that feels powerless, that feels like they don't deserve it, at some point the universe is going to create the circumstances to show you that that's what's happening, which is why ultimately all of your circumstances are your biggest teaching. So whatever your current circumstances are now are a reflection of what you've previously accepted as true. Okay? Whether you were consciously aware of it or not. So conversely, the trick to changing the current circumstances is changing what you accept as true. Which sounds simple, isn't always as easy as it doesn't always feel as easy as it sounds. So that's the whole top and bottom of the manifestation side of it, is that you're not manifesting another narcissist because you're a narcissist. You're manifesting a narcissist to show you that there's part of you that's still holding on to a victim mentality. And that doesn't mean that you're wrong or broken. It's just showing you that there's something there that you can deal with and that you can change. That takes care of some of the energetic aspects of how you deal with this situation. Then you've got the psychological aspects. The traditional psychologies, particularly from Freud, are actually really unhelpful. He certainly doesn't accept that there's anything outside of the physical, mental, emotional. So intuiting stuff doesn't count in Freud's book. In fact, he'd add that as part of the pathology of anybody's problems. So fortunately, there are more enlightened, more modern psychotherapeutic models that you can use. And actually, one of the ones that's become the most helpful is some of the modern trauma theory. Now, do you have to go deep into your childhood to sort out why you're an empath who's attracting narcissists? No, you don't. It's possible to shortcut all of that simply by realizing that none of it exists and all of it's a projection of your psyche into this field that we call reality. Most of us can't make that jump at one go. And so we have to take it back in stages. And one of the ways of doing that is looking at, well, how did I get here? And usually the answer is, well, it actually started in childhood, because it had to start somewhere. And really it started with you being trained to accept a level of behavior that we wouldn't choose. So modern trauma theory talks about trauma with a big T and trauma with a little t. And the big T's are the things you would expect, like loss of a parent, serious family upsets, primary carers who are in prison or who have addiction problems, deaths in the family, major financial stress. Those will count as the big T things, but actually the little t things have at least as much or even more impact on the developing psyche of the child, because what they cause is chronic stress. So where there is chronic stress going on, where you're constantly told that you're not good enough, or constantly criticized, or constantly not allowed to speak, or things that are reinforced over and over, your nervous system learns that in order to experience the positive things that we need growing up as human beings, like love and safety and having our emotional needs met and security and boundaries. Having all those means that we also get to experience this constant level of insecurity or fear or doubt or waiting for the other shoe to drop, depending on what was going on in the environment. And so, because our nervous system's already trained to hold these two ideas at the same time, we learn to accept and tolerate bad behavior from other people while we think we're also getting the things that we want. Except that then, when you end up enmeshed with a narcissist and they deliberately withhold or breadcrumb affection, attention, any kind of care, they're doing it specifically to control our behavior because they've already spotted that there's a pattern there they can exploit. They've already seen that gap in your aura. They know how to do it intuitively, instinctively. And their entire outlook is basically control. So that's how they're interacting with you. And essentially, that split in our nervous system between learning to accept this high level of stress all the time at the same time as receiving whatever nurturing and love that we can get at the time is essentially describing a trauma bond. I mean, that's really how it comes about and how it's maintained later. And because they're often formed with the people who do love us and who we love, trauma bonds can be incredibly strong and very difficult to break and move out of, even though we might have this huge degree of stress and pain and abuse going on at the same time. So that's a brief overview of some of the psychology that might be happening to a greater or lesser extent. And it's bringing us into the third key area, which is what you might call vagus dysregulation. So we're talking about the autonomic nervous system and the vagus nerve that runs the length of the body from the brain. When we're in difficult situations, it's the vagus nerve that's responsible for putting us into that fight or flight situation. So just like when you see a nervous dog, if it feels threatened and it's not on lead, it's going to run and go and hide and get out of what it thinks is a dangerous situation. Very often when they are on a lead and they know that they can't run, that's when they do that first attack lunge, dragging you with them on the other end of the leash to try and scare off what they perceive as another scary dog. It's actually quite an intelligent response, but it does take training to stop dogs from doing that. And those are the two responses that our vagus nerve governs. They're inbuilt in our psyche and our makeup, whether we're aware of it or not. Now, when you're in a situation of high stress long term, the fight and flight feels like stress. It feels like, oh, my shoulders are up around my ears and I'm stressed all the time. And it's that sense of, is the other shoe going to drop? And what have I got to deal with next? But over the long term, the fight and flight move into freeze. And in freeze, that stress is still there, but there's no energy to support it. The body is worn down. It's constantly there in the background, but it starts to erode your health because it's literally reduced the output of the energy output of the mitochondria in the cells. So at that stage, that level of stress and vagus dysregulation resulting in this freeze is often associated with gut problems, with autoimmune problems, with chronic fatigue, and certainly with sleep problems. And emotionally, it's that feeling of being past caring. You just don't have the emotional wherewithal to react anymore. Now, if long term that goes on, it can be really tough to move out of the situation because your motivation and your energy go. And at this point, you literally have less physical energy to help move you forward. And so you need a variety of techniques to help bring everything back into a normal state. So essentially we have three areas that we've been looking at. And let's just map that out. So we have the energetic or the spiritual. We have the psychological, and we have the physiological. That's that vagus nerve dysregulation. If we don't deal with all of them, let's do that, we're going to have trouble in some area. If we don't deal with the physical, the vagus dysregulation, it doesn't matter how much we do of these, we're not going to have the energy to move forward. And in actual fact, the biology is going to keep bringing us back to feeling tired and feeling like we haven't done the work. If you have done the psychological work, you've done the energetic work, and you keep feeling like nothing has happened, it's probably because this physiological response is still kicking in. Okay? If you've done that, got your vagus working, got the energetic right, but you're still replaying psychological patterns that you're not aware of, your outer reality is not going to change. You have to become aware of whatever the psychology was in order to shift it. Doesn't mean it has to be a lot of work, it's just a matter of awareness. And likewise, if you get the physical sorted and the psychological sorted, but you haven't shifted the way that you talk to yourself or changed your expectations about what's going to happen, again, you won't see a shift in reality. And it's the combination of all three that allows this magical clear center to grow. That's the area at the heart of the matter that we really want to grow. So, yeah, there's always a shortcut. The biggest shortcut is realize that none of it's real, that it's all an outpouring of consciousness, that none of it actually happened, and you can change it all in the blink of an eye. Now, as I said before, most of us can't make that leap in one go. So we have to take it in stages, working on the three levels, the three different areas to alter the identity. However, there are also shortcuts that we can take that cut the time for all this to happen. But that'll have to wait for another video. So I hope this makes sense to you and it's helpful. Let me know in the comments. And if there's something you want me to go into more detail on, let me know too. And if you don't tell me, I won't know. So I look forward to hearing from you. Okay. You got this.